Robert Durst. He's here with Mr. DeGuerin and Mr. Chesnoff. And then Mr. Lewin, Balian, and colleagues are present. The defense wish to be heard now on this hearsay and relevance 352 issue.
Well, I think we've made our record, Your Honor. We have our objections. We maintain those objections and think that 352 applies. We think that it's remote, reminding the court that this happened years after the murder of Susan Berman, and it's prejudicial.
Your Honor,
And not probative.
And in speaking to Mr. DeGuerin and Mr. Chesnoff, Your Honor, what they have told me is that other than the previous objections, which the court has already overruled in its motion, they are withdrawing their hearsay objection because they prefer the way that I am doing it versus calling in the witnesses to testify to the very explosive information which they're aware of.
To clarify then, Mr. Chesnoff?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Lewin has agreed to limit his questioning to 3 specific questions which he shared with us. And in exchange for that, we would withdraw the hearsay objection, Your Honor.
So my analysis of it, which is consistent with your agreement, is that this just description of what the witness heard from others is too elaborate and specific simply to admit for the purpose of his credibility. I think it would be enough for him to say, I was afraid, I heard he showed up in my house. But this testimony would be probative. I would allow Gardner and others to testify to what they saw, and that would be, I didn't admit that because the motive and intent to kill witnesses is significant and very, very probative of the intent in this particular case. So it makes sense to me that the objection is noted, may stand. My ruling is clear, and the agreement is that there won't be a hearsay objection to these questions. That's withdrawn. So with you understanding how I would have ruled it, it makes sense for you to withdraw that objection and to proceed as you've just described, Mr. President.
Your Honor, although I think you're clear on the record, can the court, for the purposes of appellate review, can the court incorporate, with respect to its ruling today, the prior ruling that the court made when we litigated this motion?
Yes.
The court went into more detail at that point.
I went into more detail about the basis for admitting this evidence of plans and actions Mr. Durst appears to have taken towards his brother. I think that was admissible for the reasons I described at that time. All right, so our jurors should be here in a couple of minutes. They're probably not all here yet.
Don't tell me we're going to hear more from Stewart.
The courtroom, we're back in session. Douglas Durst has resumed the witness stand. I'll remind you, you're under oath. We have Mr. Robert Durst present with his lawyers, Mr. Chesnoff and Mr. DeGuerin, Mr. Bailey and Mr. Lewin, Mr. Miata, Mr. Henderson, and Mr. Milius. All are present representing the people. And we've resolved our legal issue, and you may continue with your examination, Mr. Lewin.
All right, Mr. Durst, we only have about 3/4 of my examination left. I just lobbed that up there. We're almost done, I promise.
Objection, Your Honor.
We're almost done. Again, if you can, Mr. Durst, I want you to listen very carefully. Pursuant to prior agreement, I'm going to lead you through these questions, which are going to require a yes or no answer. Do you understand that?
Yes, I do.
After your brother jumped bail in Galveston and was on the run from authorities, did you become aware that he had shown up at your home in Katona?
Yes, I did.
And at that time, is it true that based on the prior information you had become aware of from the jail calls that you had, strike that. At that time, were you already aware, did you already have fear of your brother regarding your safety and your family's safety?
Yes, I did.
And pursuant to that fear, did you have private security that worked for you and would guard you and your family at all times?
Yes, I did.
So on that day, did you become aware that Mr. Durst had shown up uninvited at your home in Katona?
Yes, I did.
And at that point in time, on that date, did you actually see him?
No, I did not.
Were you made aware by your security people that he had come to your house?
Yes.
And when you found out he had come to your house, what was your response?
I was frightened and concerned for my family.
I'm going to go to another area. I'm going to ask you, do you know who Andrew Jarecki and Mark Smerling are?
Yes, I do.
And did they attempt to interview you while they were making their movie All Good Things, and or while they were putting together what eventually became The Jinx?
They had asked, and Andrew directly surreptitiously interviewed me at a charity event.
Were you willing to cooperate to sit down for an interview with the
No, I
filmmakers?
was not.
Please wait for the questions.
At that time, were you concerned that the filmmakers were working together with your brother Bob?
I did have that concern, yes.
How wrong was that?
And is it fair to say that your relationship with the filmmakers at that time became contentious enough that there were threats of litigation?
Yes, that is correct.
Is it also true that the filmmakers were involved in filming your brother in April of 2012 when he came to the Durst organization and to the homes of several of your relatives in Manhattan?
Yes, that is correct.
And did that cause you fear and concern?
It caused me even greater concern for my family, yes.
So now I'm going to back up again and I'm going to go back to 2008. Did you become aware in 2008 that the movie All Good Things was being filmed?
Yes, I did.
And do you know where that filming was taking place?
It took place in a number of locations, Danbury, Connecticut, and Midtown Manhattan, among others.
So again, I'm going to lead you through this area, meaning yes or no questions. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Around that time, again in 2008, did you become aware of another incident where Mr. Durst, your brother, had shown up to your house?
Yes.
At that time, had he been invited?
No.
Did you have a full-time security team at that time?
Yes.
Was he able, and I'm talking about the first time in 2008, to your understanding, was he able to actually get on to your property?
Yes.
Did you have any contact or interaction with him at that time?
No, I did not.
And pursuant to your security protocols, were you and your family taken away to a safe area
Yes.
at the location?
Yes, I was taken away.
Was there a second incident around that same time, a few days after the first incident, where Mr. Durst showed up again?
Yes.
And again, did you yourself see your brother at that time?
No, I did not.
Were you advised by your security team in real time that this was going on?
Yes, I was.
And can you explain, what was your response when you found out that your brother had shown up? And I want to be clear, I'm not asking you to describe in any way what happened or what the facts were with him showing up. I'm simply asking you, what was your response to that happening?
My response, emotional response, was I was very concerned, not just for myself, but for my family.
At the time, did you have numerous family members who were on the premises?
Yes,
Did these involve your children?
yes.
As a result of that situation and the other situations that I've described, do you to this day still have full-time security?
We have a security force that works for the company, and they provide security for me. That
And,
is-
and even in terms of your coming to court today, did you come with security that you had hired?
Yes, I hired security today,
And why did you hire security? What was the reason for that?
because I have fear my brother has threatened to kill me, and I have fear that he may have the means to do so.
And in terms of the security that you've hired and the concerns that you have, do they expressly relate back to the fear of your brother?
Yes,
Right. I want to go to 2012. In 2012, are you aware of either you or your security people having contact with the FBI regarding your concerns about your brother Douglas? Your brother Bob, excuse me.
yes, we had contact with the FBI.
And did those contacts involve you or your security people wanting to know if there was anything that could be done to protect you?
Yes,
You have been up there testifying about your brother and various incidents. I want to ask you, if I were to say, are you a private or a public person?
I'm a private person that sometimes has to appear in public.
So for instance, there's another somewhat famous New York real estate person who ended up going on to a career after New York real estate. They have some buildings named after them, etc. Is that the kind of persona that you have?
No, the exact opposite.
And can you explain what you mean?
I mean that, for instance, your example, we don't put our names on buildings or on anything. You'll never find a Durst library or a Durst building. And we do, when we try and stay out of the papers, except when we're opening a building or have something to publicize.
And in terms of your family history, and just in terms of the emotions that are involved, how would you describe overall, in terms of embarrassing, humiliating, etc., the issue of your brother with respect to other things you've had to encounter in your life?
Well, it's the most embarrassing thing about that I've ever encountered.
And is it fair to say that this has been a feeling that you've had for more than 20 years?
Yes, it's gotten progressively worse.
Is it also fair to say that every time there is a trial or an article or anything about it, that seeing the Durst name associated with these events is painful for you and your family?
Yes, it is very painful for us to have our name associated with these incidents.
And that all being said, despite the issues that you have with your brother, is it still difficult for you to be up here testifying against him in a murder case?
Yes, it is.
Despite everything that has happened, how do you feel about your brother as you sit here today?
Well, first I am frightened, and I also, though, feel sorry for him for the situation that we're in. I would have done anything to avoid it, but I just, I'm here because I've been subpoenaed and because I've been subpoenaed, yes.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Right, Mr. DeGuerin, will you be cross-examining the witness?
I will, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Yep. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Durst. I'm Dick DeGuerin. You know who I am. I know who you are. And we've never met, though, have we?
We have not met, no.
You know that I've met your sister, Wendy.
Yes, I know that.
And you know that I knew and was friends with Michael Kennedy, a lawyer in New York that the Durst family hired early on when Bob was a fugitive from Galveston, correct?
The trust hired him, the family did not.
Okay. And of course, you're the primary trustee.
Yes.
Preeminent, is primary preeminent, what's a,
Well, in this trust, in Bob's trust, where I was at the time just a trustee.
yeah, the trusts were all together at the time that Bob had the trouble in Galveston, correct?
Yes.
And is it fair to say that you and Bob have not had much to do with each other since Bob left the Durst organization in, what, mid-90s?
1994, yes.
Right. There's legend about that, and there's fact about it. I think you've said that you actually were the one to convince the trustees that you should be the trustee and that Bob should not. Is that
The
right?
successor trustee, but that was much earlier.
Okay. And that had to do with his conduct at the office.
That's correct.
Particularly him, if I can put it in street terms, peeing in the wastebaskets.
Among other things, yes.
Yeah. Kind of odd, isn't it?
Yes, it's odd.
There's also several different stories about the death of your mother, whether Bob was a witness or not. Your belief, by the way, you were 5 years old at the time,
Yes.
and you did not see anything, right?
No.
I think what you said about it is that you and your other siblings were rushed off to a relative nearby while
Yes.
the investigation was being done.
Yes, that's correct.
Right. But there's no question that Bob was there when it happened, is there?
There is question in my mind, yes.
No, I don't mean out looking at the roof or anything, that he was at the home.
We were all at the home, that we had dinner that night, and we all went to bed, and then we were brought over to my aunt and uncle's house.
Right. And they tried to shelter you as much as possible from her tragic death, correct?
Yes,
And it was tragic. She fell or slipped or some say jumped to her death from the roof of the family home
that's correct.
onto a concrete or very hard driveway.
Yes.
it's true, isn't it, that, well, you were only 5 years old, so you might not know this, but it is true, isn't it, that Bob, that's been a very significant trauma in Bob's life.
I'm sorry, could you,
Yes, I know you were only 5 years old at the time, but it's true, isn't it, that the death of your mother, the tragic death of your mother, was a very significant trauma in Bob's early life,
yes, as it was for all of us.
of course. After your mother's death, it's true, isn't it, that you and your siblings were largely raised by nannies and governesses and maids.
That is correct.
Your father spent a lot of time with the Durst organization in New York City after your mother's death, correct?
That is correct.
And of course, he and his two brothers and the rest of the Durst organization were very successful during that period of time in building the Durst organization to what it is today, right?
That is correct.
From your early life, and I know that we have to kind of stop in the mid-90s when you lost contact with Bob for a while, and that's true, you lost contact with him for a long time, didn't you?
Yes.
From the early 90s to 93, 94, whenever the split came.
We lost, I knew where he was. I wasn't in contact with him.
Did you know where he was all the time?
No.
Did you know that he had several different homes in several parts of the country?
Not at that time.
Did you know who his friends were at that time?
I knew some of his friends at that time. Yeah.
Sure. You knew Doug Oliver, of course,
I did know Doug Oliver.
but did you know that he became estranged from Doug Oliver for a while, at least not in contact with Doug?
I knew that he became estranged with many of his previous friends, yes.
Right. I want to shift gears just for a moment. In roughly early November of 2000, perhaps October the 31st, but certainly early November of 2000, you and others learned that Janine Pirro was reopening an investigation into the disappearance of Kathy, right?
That's correct, yes.
I believe on direct examination, Mr. Lewin brought out that there was a man that worked for you, kind of a well-known guy that he's a PR guy and kind of an investigator. I'm sorry, I'm lost his name. Marty Matz.
Yes.
Yeah. And your belief is that through his connections with the media, he learned that there was going to be some media stories about Janine Pirro reopening the investigation into Kathy's disappearance.
Yes, that's correct.
Now, Janine Pirro at the time was the district attorney of Westchester County, wasn't she?
She was.
And even then, she was quite a presence on the media, wasn't she?
I believe so. I don't.
You don't watch Fox News?
No, I do not.
Well, good for you. But the thought was that Janine Pirro was going to make this a big deal and use the Durst name to do that.
Question is
Right?
with respect to the thoughts.
Well-
Okay, rephrase.
Yeah, among yourself and other members of the Durst organization, You were concerned that Janine Pirro was going to make a big splash and use the Durst name as part of that terrible publicity, right?
That is correct, yes.
During that brief period of time, I want to concentrate on that, and that would be early November 2000, right before the first news article came out, and I believe it's been, I believe we can agree that that was November the 11th of 2000.
Are you asking for a stipulation?
How about that?
My memory without checking is November 9th, but you might be right. Let me, while you're doing this, I'll look it up and I'll tell you what I can stipulate.
And maybe I remember November 11th because it's what we used to call Armistice Day.
But one moment to continue, I'll let you know. You might be right, Mr. DeGuerin. I just need to make sure.
Well, 9th or 11th, and we'll get it straight.
Okay? We'll stipulate to that, Your Honor.
9th or 11th or 11th?
If you give me a moment,
All right.
I'll tell you.
So anyway, we'll, as you understand, that would be the second week in early November of 2000.
Mr. Henderson tells me it is the 11th, so we will stipulate. No, Mr. Williams told me. I couldn't. No eyes in the back of my head. Someone told me. November 11th, stipulated.
Okay.
Here.
So you're stipulating I was right?
So there's a first and a last time. Even a broken clock, Dick, twice a day.
You didn't need to do it that way, John. So, if you understand, Mr. Durst, and I'm sorry that we're having this little repartee, but
Me
we've been
too.
together for so long, we have the Stockholm Syndrome. That's the period of time I'm asking you about right now. During that period of time, you saw that Bob, when he learned about it, when either you or Wendy told him about it, that he was very concerned, wasn't he?
He was very concerned, yes.
During that time, several people around you and in this Durst group brought up that old saw that a prosecutor can have a ham sandwich indicted if they want to.
That's correct.
And what that meant was, whether there was any evidence or not, this Janine Pirro could cause there to be charges filed. That was a concern, wasn't it?
Yes,
It wasn't a matter of Janine Pirro trying to find Kathy, for which everybody would be grateful, but a matter of Janine Pirro coming after Bob, right?
correct, yes.
In fact, did she even accuse you, I don't mean formally, but in a meeting with you, that you had something to do with it?
That is correct.
And that's the farthest thing from the truth, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
That meeting with her, I believe you've described it as it was very short.
It was very brief, yes.
And that was your choice, wasn't it?
You know, once I told her that I had nothing to help, that I could give her to help her, she ended the meeting.
I got the impression, but perhaps it's wrong, from the interviews that you did with Mr. Lewin and other members of his crew, that you had politely but firmly told Janine Pirro she was all wet.
I didn't use those words, but yes,
Is that an apt,
Yes.
apt description,
Yes.
description of it? Okay. So there was concern among your group, meaning the Durst organization and Bob, including Bob.
it was basically my sister and myself.
Right. Number one was you were concerned that the Durst name was going to be dragged through the mud, right?
No, number one, I was concerned that my brother would be indicted, and that secondly, that the Durst name would be dragged through the mud.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to rank it like that. I meant,
Okay, we
one
did.
thing that you were concerned about was the Durst name being dragged through the mud.
Yes, yes,
And secondly, and not secondly, but another very strong concern was that Bob would be indicted with no evidence.
yes.
In fact, there was a lawyer that was retained at the time for Bob, right?
Yes, yes, you're right.
Okay. I'm not asking you about any conversations that you had with a lawyer, you probably didn't, but was that during the time that it was mentioned that a prosecutor could get a ham sandwich indicted?
Yes,
Okay. Now, you'd had very little contact with Bob from 94, roughly, on to late 2000. Were you aware of exactly what happened with him after that period of time, where he went, what he did, until later?
no,
Did you learn later that he, in fact, had fled, I guess that's the only way to put it, fled to Galveston, Texas?
I learned that later, but I did not know it then.
Yes, I understand. And did you learn later, it's part of the legend and of the case, that he disguised himself as a mute woman to rent a cheap apartment in Galveston?
Yes,
That's pretty odd, isn't it?
yes, it is.
Now, am I right that the next time you saw Bob was for a wedding that took place in Houston of a family member?
That is correct.
And when was that wedding?
That was shortly after September 11th in 2001.
And of course, September 11th of 2001 is a date that everyone that was alive during the time remembers, isn't it?
Yes,
Did the Durst organization or the Durst Trust lose property in the attacks of September 11th?
no,
Nonetheless, all of New York City was impacted by that, weren't they?
that is correct.
And yet life goes on, and you and other members of the family came to a wedding in Houston, Texas, in late September.
Yes.
What family member was it that was getting married?
My sister's son.
And Bob came to that wedding, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
There was a hotel that was kind of the center of activities for several days,
Yes.
and that was the Four Seasons in Houston?
I don't recall the hotel.
Okay.
Probably.
But Bob showed up there
Yes.
as Bob Durst,
Yes, it's Bob Durst, yes.
and you recall that one of the nights there was a Western theme party?
I don't recall that, sorry, no.
I'm not faulting you for your memory. Maybe Western things are more important to some people than they are to others, but there was a kind of an informal party before the wedding the next day, right?
Yes,
And Bob showed up at that.
yes.
Do you remember that he had a Western shirt on?
I don't recall that, no.
Had you ever seen your brother Bob in a Western shirt, as
No,
far
I
as you
have
can
never seen-
recall?
You say I did, I believe you, but I have never seen him. To
Okay.
my recollection, I haven't seen him in a Western shirt.
Let's do the court reporter a favor and wait until I'm finished with my question.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. You've testified before, you've given deposition testimony before, so you know that we're not supposed to talk at the same time because it makes it hard on the court reporter, right?
Yes.
Okay, so back to the wedding. Was there an informal party the first night of the wedding that everybody went to on a bus?
Yes.
And Bob was on that bus,
Yes, he was.
and you were?
I was.
And then the wedding of your niece, or nephew, was the next night,
That's correct.
and Bob came to that.
Yes.
Was he appropriately attired? That is, did he have a tux on?
I don't recall, he did not, which I would have, so I believe he must have.
Okay. Did you ask Bob where he was living or what he was doing then, or did you have any conversation?
I had no conversation.
Okay. When did you learn that Susan Berman had been murdered in Los Angeles in the Christmas season of 2000?
Shortly after, I read it in the papers is how I learned about it.
Okay. Did you read it in the New York papers?
Yes,
You had known her briefly or slightly.
slightly, yes.
You knew her to come to Bob's aid when Kathy disappeared by dealing with the media for Bob, right?
Yes,
The Durst organization had its own media or PR people working on it, right?
yes,
And Bob had Susan Berman dealing with the press.
that's correct.
Did you have any further contact with Bob after you learned of Susan Berman's death, her murder, and when you later learned that Bob was a fugitive? Do you understand the question? It was kind of awkward, and from the time that you learned of Susan Berman's death until you learned that a year later almost, Bob was a fugitive.
No, I had no contact.
So you didn't know where he was, right?
That's correct.
Didn't know who he was associating with.
That's correct.
You don't know, or I presume he did not reach out to you during that interim,
No, he did not.
and you did not reach out to him.
No, I did not.
Do you know if he had contact with Wendy, your sister?
No, it's my belief that there was no contact with any of the family after that.
Okay.
In that period, sorry.
That's what I mean, in that period. Yes, we're on the same page. And so, once you did hear that he was a fugitive from Galveston, Texas, did you hear the lurid stories about what had happened in Galveston?
Yes, I did.
By that I mean, generally speaking, that there was a body found that had been dismembered. It was
Yes.
found in the
Sorry.
Galveston Bay, and that Bob was the suspect and that he was on the lam.
Yes,
Did you hear that he was a fugitive before you heard that he had been charged, or did you learn it only after he had become a fugitive?
Only, no, I had heard he was, as I recall, I had heard that a Robert Durst had been charged, and I could not believe it was my brother. And we actually found another Robert Durst living in Galveston, but then I became aware that it was my brother.
During the period of time between when he became a fugitive, which I'll suggest to you was in October of 2001, until his arrest in November in Pennsylvania, did you have any contact with him?
I had no physical contact with him, no.
All right. But you did, or either you or the trust or some people in the family hired Michael Kennedy while nobody knew where he was, right?
I, as trustee, had the trust hire Michael Kennedy, yes.
Yeah. So the jury can understand, Michael Kennedy was a very well-known, very successful criminal lawyer in New York City at the time, wasn't he?
Yes,
He's no longer with us.
that's correct.
And I believe he went on television a couple of times asking or saying that the family wanted Bob to surrender.
Yes,
And of course, then you learned of the bizarre circumstances under which he was arrested in Pennsylvania, right?
yes, that is
I mean, it was
correct.
all over the news.
Yes,
And of course, I think there's no dispute that he was arrested in a large grocery store, having shoplifted a chicken salad sandwich, a Wall Street Journal, and a Band-Aid.
yeah, I'm having a hard time knowing when you're finished a question or when you're...
I'm sorry, yeah.
So-
Well, the mask causes that, but I'll try to let you know when I'm ready for you to answer.
Okay, thank you.
So did I describe it correctly as you understood it?
Yes,
And again, pretty odd, wasn't it?
again, pretty odd, yes.
You know that Bob did not hire Michael Kennedy, and did not take him on as the lawyer in Galveston.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
And during the run-up to the trial which took place in 2003, in the late summer and fall of 2003, did you hire other lawyers, or the Durst Trust hire other lawyers to monitor the trial?
Yes,
That was Dan Cogdale, right?
I'm sorry, which?
Dan Cogdale,
Yes,
a prominent and successful criminal defense lawyer in Houston.
yes,
But he was not hired in order to assist the defense of your brother. He was hired to monitor the trial for the Durst organization.
that's correct.
And once again, understanding that you and the trustees of the Durst organization don't like unfavorable publicity. That's true, isn't it?
That is true.
In fact, as Mr. Lewin pointed out, without spelling out TRUMP, your philosophy is quite a bit different from his.
Yes, it is.
And I presume that one of the reasons that you hired the lawyer was to monitor and see whether and how the news coming out of Galveston would hurt, if it did, the Trump, I apologize, the Durst organization.
Yes.
The jury found Bob not guilty.
He had a very good attorney.
Thank you very much.
Yes, they found him not guilty.
It actually was a team effort, and my dear friend and the late Mike Ramsey was a member of that team, and Chip Lewis, who's here with us today, was a member of that team. And thank you for the compliment. After the trial, and after Bob pled guilty to destroying evidence, basically, and bond jumping, he served a period of time in jail after that, right?
That's correct.
You were aware of that.
Yes.
And then eventually he was released, correct?
Yes.
I'm going to change subjects for a moment. Mr. Lewin asked you that in the interactions you had with Kathy, did you ever observe her to be acting consistently with a cocaine addict? Do you remember him asking you that?
I do.
Your answer was, no, I never saw that.
Yes.
How does a cocaine addict act?
They're constantly snorting cocaine and constantly looking for it.
That's a pretty succinct description. How does a cocaine abuser, maybe not an addict, how does a cocaine abuser act?
They're constantly sneaking off to the bathroom and coming back stoned.
They stay up late at night.
Yes.
They talk a lot. Is that right?
Yes.
They may make long phone calls late at night to friends.
Yes.
They might make long phone calls to friends trying to find some more cocaine, right?
That's possible, yes.
And if they stay up late and use cocaine on a particular night, they're not very good the next day, are they?
I can't answer that question.
Well, I don't know if a hangover is the right word to use from someone the next morning after a coke-fueled party. Is that
State Foundation.
just his knowledge about a cocaine abuser as opposed to a cocaine addict?
Right, I sustained an objection that it lacks foundation.
Okay. Well, as an employer, as a person that runs a large organization, you know that cocaine usage is not very consistent with being a good employee, is it?
No, it's not.
Nor is it very good to be a student, is it?
I can't answer that question. It's not.
Well, just basically from your knowledge, you wouldn't want one of your employees coming with a cocaine hangover.
I can speak
Just-
for employees. I cannot speak for students. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry?
I can speak about employees. It's hard for me to speak about students.
Well, that's just a small jump. You have to concentrate if you're a student, right?
That is correct,
And
yes.
especially if you're a medical student. Makes sense, doesn't it?
Makes sense, yes.
Okay. Bob was proud of Kathy being in medical school, wasn't he?
I had no knowledge of that.
Okay. You did mention that your grandfather was one of the founders of Einstein Medical School, right?
Yes, that is correct.
And on the founders board, is there a group of people, including members of the Durst family, that are in the founders board?
There was a plaque in our office that commemorated the founding of the school and honored Joseph Durst.
And you don't know whether or how Kathy Durst might have used her name to get enrolled in Einstein, do you?
I have no knowledge of how.
You don't have any knowledge either way, do you?
Correct.
But at any rate, were you aware that she, during the last 6 months of her career as a medical student, was having troubles?
That assumes facts not in evidence.
No, it's in evidence. The records are in evidence.
Your Honor,
There are different inferences one could draw. Might not be the best inference, but it's an inference. You can ask.
Were you aware of that?
No, I was not.
Were you aware that she was required to repeat some of her classes and some of her rotations?
No, I was not.
Were you aware that she had missed excessively attendance?
No, I was not aware of that.
Were you aware that the dean of students had reached out to her to offer her his assistance before she disappeared?
No.
It would not be surprising to you, would it, that the daughter-in-law or of a member of the family that helped establish the medical school would be able to call upon the dean of students as opposed to a professor
that's
for help?
Facts not in evidence, lacks foundation, outside the scope of direct.
Sustain.
I can keep going.
Sustained.
All right, your average is going up. All right.
Sustained.
Well, as far as Kathy's personal habits were concerned, had you seen, when was the last time you saw her or were in her presence before she disappeared?
The Christmas before she disappeared.
So that would be the Christmas of 1981?
Yes.
Okay. And before that?
I don't recall before that.
She and Bob had actually lived with you and your wife in the Katona home
That's correct.
for how long?
I'm not sure. It was 2 or 3 years.
And what period of time was it?
It was in the 1970s, I believe. 70, 71.
Okay,
70.
early 70s.
Early 70s, yes.
So 10 or 15 years before she disappeared.
That's correct.
You were concerned then, weren't you, about their drug usage?
Yes.
In fact, you have said to the prosecution that you were concerned that she and Bob, but she particularly, was using a lot of Quaaludes, right?
Both were using a lot of Quaaludes.
And Quaaludes, that was actually a prescription drug that was being abused in the 70s and 80s, wasn't it?
Yes.
And that was one of the concerns that you had about why it was not good for you and Bob and your wives and your families to be living in the same house?
Yes.
And after that, Bob and Kathy bought the South Salem house.
That's correct.
In the same general area of the country, but removed by, what, 10 miles?
approximately.
Katona, South Salem, Westchester County, those are all what some people might call bedroom communities for people that work in New York City?
It is now, less so then,
All right. But very nice area.
yes.
And so there never was a confrontation between you and Bob or your wives that caused you to decide that it was not a good thing for the two families to live together. It just happened that you were not pleased with Bob and Kathy using Quaaludes around your family.
Neither of us, my wife or Kathy or Bob, were happy with the situation. And we reached agreement that if I moved out for a year, he would find another location.
And he did that,
And he did, yes.
and you moved back in.
Yes.
Were you aware generally of the fact that Bob also had an apartment in the city, in New York City?
Generally, I was aware of that, yes.
Okay. Were you ever at any of the apartments that he had there?
No,
There was an apartment on East 82nd Street. Were you familiar with that one?
I've heard of it, I'm not familiar
That
with it.
assumes that's not in evidence. It's 86.
86. I'll stipulate it was East 86. How's that?
So stipulated. I got Mr. DeGuerin on New York geography. That is one of his preferred categories.
And were you aware, well, I guess I didn't get it, with all our repartee here, we didn't get an answer to, were you aware of the East 86th Street apartment?
Yes,
All right. Were you aware that later, and at part of the same time, he and Kathy had a penthouse on Riverside Drive?
yes,
Okay. Was the East 86th building a Durst building?
no,
So it was an apartment that was independent of the Durst organization. It was one that he and Kathy had.
that is correct.
At a later time, Bob and Kathy, if you know, and you may not, Bob and Kathy spent most of their time at the Riverside Drive apartment or at the South Salem home.
That's gonna.
Were you aware of that?
Assumes that's not in evidence. It would depend on hearsay. No personal knowledge.
Okay, you lose all three of those, but let's see. Were you aware of that?
I was generally aware that they were staying at 96th Street with a penthouse and South Salem.
Okay. And you're calling it 96th Street?
You guys are confusing me with all the numbers, but it was the penthouse on the west side that,
Penthouse on the west side on Riverside Drive?
yes,
All right. And so if Bob had a favorable lease on East 86th Street, it would make sense to sublease that if they were not living there, wouldn't
That's
it?
gonna call for speculation, last foundation, outside the scope of cross.
I don't want to have to call him back as our witness, Your Honor, but I think it's something that he knows.
Okay.
Generally,
It's, the other issue is it's asking about a fact and then asking the witness to give an opinion on a fact that's not proven. Which is why it lacks foundation and assumes facts not in evidence.
Okay, second. Go to the actual question.
let me just withdraw it and ask it a different way.
Okay, we can start over then.
Okay. Would it make you, this is asking Moses about the flood, but you know New York real estate like the back of your hand, don't you?
Yes, I do.
If someone had a favorable lease on a apartment on the east side, and they weren't living there anymore, but they still had the lease, it would make sense to sublease it rather than break the lease and then have the price go way up.
I don't know about the price going way up, and it would, of course, be determined by the terms of the lease, but if they were permitted to do so, it would make sense, yes.
Okay. I want to turn now to the time when Kathy disappeared, and that first week when you learned about it, and then the time that passed in the next few weeks. So first, my question to you is, you understand the time period I'm talking about? That would be February of 1982.
Yes,
You heard about it first from Bob himself, didn't you?
excuse me, yes, I did.
And you and Seymour may have been on the same phone call,
No,
not? Well, okay, I misunderstood the way you said it to Mr. Lewin. Seymour learned at about the same time?
I would be guessing. I learned of it, and Seymour knew of it, but I don't know when he learned of it.
Okay, but you learned of it from Bob.
That's correct.
And when he called you and told you that, he seemed distraught, didn't he?
He did.
Now, you said on the Monday, which would have been February the 1st, you didn't know whether Bob was in the office, didn't think he was, but you also told Mr. Lewin that you were only 60% sure about that, right?
Correct.
On Tuesday, you've testified to the jury that on Tuesday you had some car trouble and you called in collect.
Correct, yes.
I want to put up on the screen that particular piece of evidence. We can put it up on the. Yeah, if I could have People's Exhibit 97, I believe.
72. The clerk's.
I'm not good.
Clerk's got it.
Okay.
There it is.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, thank you. I don't know how to, if we can circle in on it and get close. All right, I think we can all see that. The first line is a collect call from Katona about 10:30 in the morning. Is that the call that you made?
I don't know who made the call.
Well, from Katona, do you recognize that number?
That's my house number, yes.
Okay. You had a session with Mr. Lewin and others yesterday, didn't you?
I did, yes.
Did you tell him then that that was the Monday that you had the car trouble, specifically 2 flat tires, and you had to have it fixed? And you called collect to say you'd be late?
Your Honor, that misstates the evidence. He's getting Monday and Tuesday mixed up, Mr. DeGuerin, so it's misstating the evidence that's been presented. The evidence regarding
Why doesn't
the,
he let him answer the question?
no, it assumes facts not in evidence in the way it's asked.
The question is to a conversation that he had with you, not his testimony, as I understand it. So
That's correct.
There's been no evidence about this at all, so it's not misstating testimony.
The witness has testified regarding when the incident happened with the tire shop, and he has previously indicated and testified, the records show that it was Tuesday. So the problem is, Mr. DeGuerin's question, in the way that it's asked, assumed in the question that a call, it didn't ask whether a collect call was made. It made an assumption in the question itself. That's the problem.
He's talking about a different conversation, Mr. Lewin, overruled.
Now I'm thoroughly confused.
Yeah.
What I'm doing, Your Honor, I'm trying to find the report that Mr. Lewin sent us.
Here.
Yeah, there it is. So let me ask it this way. Did you tell Mr. Lewin yesterday that February the 1st, 1982 is when you had 2 flat tires and had to take your car to Mavis Tire to get your tires repaired, and that you then called the office collect to let them know that you were going to be late?
If I did, I was mistaken.
Do you think it might refresh your recollection if I showed you Mr. Lewin's report?
Your Honor,
You see, I'm not Mr. Lewin's report.
To the character-
Hold on.
Characterization
Wait a minute.
of Mr. Lewin's report.
I just was correcting
It is
myself.
not my
It's
report.
Detective Thornton and Detective Romero's report about a conversation with Mr. Lewin yesterday. They both ought to remember that.
Okay, y'all get really excited about these things. All right, let's,
May I approach the witness?
no, you want to refresh his recollection about something that he recalls and denies, so no, you may not.
Well, Mr. Durst, did you meet with Mr. Lewin, 2 attorneys for you, and Detectives Thornton and Romero yesterday at the Beverly Wilshire at 9500 Wilshire Boulevard?
Yes, I did.
Okay. At that time, did you say that you remembered February 1st as being the time that you call collect about your 2 flat tires?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Are you saying now that was incorrect?
Yes, I'm saying that was incorrect.
All right. What have you seen since yesterday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon that has convinced you were incorrect about yesterday?
The screen which shows the date of the call.
Yes, the date of the call, or the date of a call from Katona, is on February the 1st, the first line.
Yeah, but that's from my house.
That's your house.
Yes,
Who else would have called from your house?
my wife.
So she would call and a collect call would be accepted.
Yes.
By the way, were there different telephone operators at the Durst organization from time to time?
Yes.
So the lady, Ms. Jones, that we've had a stipulation about was not the only person.
We didn't have a stipulation about Ms. Jones.
What's her name? We had a stipulation about somebody.
Friedman.
Okay, just rephrase your question.
So anyway, there were several secretaries or telephone operators who were authorized to accept collect calls.
There were several receptionists that were authorized.
Reception,
yes.
thank you. Okay. And were you shown this record yesterday?
I don't recall, but I don't think so.
But you do recall that yesterday you said the date that you had the car trouble was February 1st.
I do recall that yesterday I mistakenly said February 1st when I should have said February 2nd.
Okay, and so the other call that you've identified was the line 4, which was on February the 2nd from Mount Kisco.
Yes.
And that number that made the call, 24188, whatever, what phone number is that?
I've been told it's the phone number for Mavis Tire,
Who told you that?
Mr. Lewin.
Okay, he told you that yesterday?
he's told me that yesterday and in the past.
And even though he told you that that was a call from Mavis Tire Company, when you told him it was on February the 1st, maybe I'm missing something.
I guess you are.
Yeah.
Will you ask a question?
Amen.
What am I missing?
You're missing that I made a mistake yesterday and said February 1st instead of February 2nd.
Okay. There's a call right above that, number 2 call, from San Francisco. Was your brother Tommy living in San Francisco at the time? You see the call I'm referring to, number 2, I'm sorry, number 3 from San Francisco, California, a collect call?
This was in 1980. I don't know whether he was living there or not.
Would you like a stipulation, Mr. DeGuerin? I'm not sure what the stipulation's gonna be. Asking a question. You don't know whether your brother Tommy was living there then?
Yes, I do not know
Okay.
where Tom was living then.
It's true, isn't it, that collect calls were quite more common back in the early 80s, late 70s than they are today?
Yes, that's true.
All right. By the way, how many times have you talked to Mr. Lewin over the years?
Objection, relevance, and vague as to
Overall.
subject matter,
Overall.
Your Honor.
Well, I'm sure you weren't talking to him about the Dodgers, but how many times have you talked to Mr. Lewin
I believe
about
4
this
times.
case? Sorry, about this case,
I believe 4 times.
all right? And yesterday was one of the 4 times?
Yes.
Was it generally true that an operator, telephone operator, receptionist, got a collect call at the Durst organization? If they recognized the name, they would accept it?
Generally true, yes.
Okay. And as we see in lines, 11 and 12, there are 2 more calls from Katona, collect calls. One on this, they're both on the 3rd, I believe, from the number you've identified as your home number.
Yes.
You know if that was you or your wife or somebody
I
else?
don't know who it was.
Okay. The 3rd would have been Wednesday. You were in the office on Wednesday?
Yes.
Would that have been a call to you, if you know?
I don't know.
All right.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Yeah, would those have been calls to you there on the 3rd?
It's possible, I don't know.
Okay, I asked you, when Bob called and told you that Kathy, he didn't know where Kathy was. Is that what he said?
He said Kathy has not been home for several days.
And he was distraught?
Yes.
And then actually Seymour and Bob started doing things from that time on to try to find Kathy, didn't they?
That question is compound.
All right, Seymour started doing things to try to find Kathy, didn't he?
I have no knowledge of that.
Did you tell Mr. Lewin and interview on April the 15th, 2015, that Seymour made every effort to try to find Kathy?
I don't recall.
Sorry, I got the date wrong. On the 13th, April the 13th. Did you tell Mr. Lewin and his crew that Seymour made every...
Sustained.
Object to the term crew, court's already admonished.
I have. It's disparaging. Don't disparage other
I don't
counsel.
mean anything disparaging by it, Judge.
Okay, well then don't say it.
I don't have a crew anyway, I would like one.
It's impolite.
Did you tell Mr. Lewin and several of his cohorts that Seymour made every effort he could?
I don't recall saying that.
May I see if you refresh his recollection?
Ask him if you think it would refresh his recollection.
Would it refresh your recollection if I showed you a part of the transcript?
I can save you the trouble. If that's what it says, then I said it.
Well, and the quote is, but Seymour made every effort he could. That's in answer to a question about hiring a task force, hiring investigators, doing everything to find Bob's wife. Does that refresh your recollection?
I've already said it. I said it, and if, yes, it does.
And you were aware that Bob had hired a guy that specialized in missing people?
Yes.
Private detective, right?
Yes.
I couldn't hear you.
Yes.
Said yes.
Thank you. Your discussions with Bob at the time, Mr. Lewin's asked you about that, but I want to ask you, I believe your answer to Mr. Lewin was, did Bob mention to you at the time that he believed her disappearance was related to cocaine? A little earlier today, you remember that?
That I do remember, yes.
And your answer was, I recall he said something about a drug dealer. A drug dealer had been to the apartment, right?
That's what I said, yes.
Yes. Tell us a little bit more about that. How did that come up?
When Bob was telling me that she had disappeared, he said it might have to do with drugs and a drug dealer that had been to the apartment.
You knew that the New York City and Westchester were investigating Kathy's disappearance, didn't you?
That assumes facts not in evidence in the
Or did you?
question regarding Westchester.
Well, I'll do it one at a time. Were you aware that New York City was doing an investigation?
Yes, I was aware New York City was investigating.
And were you aware that Westchester was doing an investigation?
That question assumes a fact, not an evidence. It states a fact and then asks if he's aware of it.
No, I said, were you aware?
The problem is, were you aware indicates that in fact.
Speaking objections.
Okay, so let's discuss it during a break. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to excuse you until 3:30. Do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case. We'll see you at 3:30. Do not discuss your testimony with any witness. To me, it's a matter of semantics here because so Westchester, I guess there wasn't much. Detective Struck is investigating, right?
Yes, but here's the issue, Your Honor. The problem is the witnesses have all testified that New York State never did a, quote, investigation in the case. So if I may finish. So the problem is that in asking the question, are you aware that New York State Police were doing an investigation? The question itself suggests, in a fact, assumes a fact, not an evidence, that such investigation was taking place.
So you're saying it's not a fact because you define investigation differently from the way the defense defines investigation. The jury might think something had taken place that they didn't hear about?
No, I'm defining it the way that the witnesses who have testified to it. In other words, the witnesses who were asked, who worked for the Westchester, New York State Police and the Westchester District Attorney's Office, by testimony and stipulation, have all said that they did not conduct an investigation. That is their testimony. That was testified by Detective Harney.
Okay, so I do recall.
They went through the house, they talked to witnesses.
That is.
I mean,
Well, I mean, I think that's a.
you're right.
I mean, I recall that, and I don't know why that wouldn't be a reasonable basis for a question.
For this reason,
it makes sense.
This is the, can I finish
Yeah,
now?
yeah.
This is what Mr. Lewin is trying to say. Because he doesn't want there to have been an investigation, he's saying we can't ask a question even though there was police activity surrounding her disappearance by people from Westchester that were not part of the New York investigation.
And you're fighting out this proxy battle through this witness who's not involved in that
Well, that's
investigation.
okay, Your Honor, but there's a lot of things that go on here that are proxy battles that really don't belong where they are. But in this instance, he's just asking a simple question. At the time, were you aware there was a New York? Yes. Were you aware there was a Westchester? Yes or no?
And then what's this leading to? What's the point of this, whether there was an investigation, Mr.
Because
DeGuerin?
we, on the other hand, are saying there was an investigation and he wasn't charged.
So here's the problem. Two things. If I can finish.
No, don't.
And that means if he wasn't charged, there wasn't even probable cause, let alone some kind of proof that Bob had anything to do with her disappearance.
Okay, so you lost me with all that stuff, because that's all.
Well, you're asking me to explain.
Well, you're pursuing a path that's not relevant. But yes.
So the problem is, and it's very simple. If they want to ask the witness, if the court finds it relevant what this witness thinks, was he aware that New York State Police went by the house or did a certain activity, which they did, which can be supported by the evidence? That would be a fair question for the witness if it was relevant, if it was not 352, and if the court found that this witness would have the foundation to address it. By Mr. Chesnoff's own admission, what he just said is, here's what we want to do. We want to ask this witness who has nothing to do with it, and we want him to basically make the point, to pontificate that in fact that we can get up and say there was an investigation. The witnesses who've been called have said they did not conduct an investigation. So don't ask the witness about an investigation that no one has said took place when it's the wrong witness with the wrong question, assuming the wrong facts.
Okay, and the other
That's it.
problem that they have, Your Honor, is this. Mr. Lewin has tried to suggest that he wasn't engaged with his brother at particular times. And the fact that he knew that his brother and the police were all actively trying to figure out what happened to Catherine is different than his theory that somehow Mr. Durst was completely disassociated and disengaged from this. I mean,
All right,
at
well,
some Your Honor, we have a murder in Westchester, we have a not guilty murder in Texas, we have Susan Berman, and now today we have him being afraid of getting killed, but we can't ask the witness his memory of events at the time.
No, well, I mean, you did spend some time on his expertise on cocaine and its consequences, so don't get too self-righteous there. Anyway, listen, I think that question itself is, I don't accept that particular objection. I think that if you call it investigation, you can, and then cross-examination on this marginally relevant point is fine. Where it's leading to is nowhere, because it's what your proffered theory of relevancy is I don't buy it. So it's not.
Then 352 then, Your Honor. Then in the end, that's where we come.
Yeah, I don't, that particular question isn't particularly prejudicial to the people's case, so I wouldn't say that either, but I think you're done when you ask, were you aware of, I mean, I don't even know, what is the, so I don't think the objection is, I don't think it,
Your Honor, the objection would be in the end, either it's tangentially, either it's irrelevant or tangentially relevant, but under 352, it's not that it's prejudicial, it is a waste of time, and it will now force me on redirect to bring up the idea that you don't have any idea about a quote investigation by Westchester. You were not a part of that. You don't know what they did or did not do. You're not relying on any personal knowledge. That's why this area would certainly be 352.
What he told Mr. Lewin is on page 10 of the April 13th interview transcript. Quote, "I knew that the New York City and Westchester were thoroughly investigating it, and I had some belief that law enforcement would if he had done it."
The
Now,
problem is that
he said that. That's where I'm going with that. That's not, there's a basis for me to ask that, and it's important to our case.
he has no personal knowledge, he has no foundation for it. Whether he said it or not, he could say a lot of things. You get up and say, Bob Durst killed 20 people. If he doesn't have foundation and personal knowledge, he can't
Mr.
testify.
Lewin, your words are just floating by. You're overdoing it. I mean, this is a the offer of proof is insufficient, and so it's irrelevant. I'll sustain a relevance objection, but
So
too
I
much.
want, Your Honor,
Yes, Mr. Chesnoff, you want to present evidence that there was a thorough investigation. Silence. That there was a thorough investigation and Mr. Durst wasn't charged, and that means that he therefore must not have killed Kathy Durst, that he must not have been, Susan Berman must not have been a witness. Is that your
Your Honor,
theory?
we're not appealing to you, we're appealing to them. And this is cross-examination, and besides which, Your Honor, you know what just happened? You overruled him, and then when he did what you said, then you accepted it.
No, I accepted it before he did all this extra
Well, you
things.
didn't say it, most respectfully, Your Honor. I don't understand how he can talk about wasting time. I mean, in the context of that argument. The man gave a statement. It's the same thing that happens all the time with his witnesses. They meet with Mr. Lewin, they say one thing. They come to court, they say something else, and we've established that. So if Mr. DeGuerin wants to show this jury that he doesn't say the same things answering our questions that he does Mr. Lewin's, and that he said other things just yesterday, or I'm sorry, in 215, closer in time, We should be able to test his memory with that as well, Your Honor.
Even on an irrelevant subject.
Well, but Your
It's
Honor,
not
what he said,
irrelevant.
hold on. What Mr. Lewin has said several times is that if your wife was missing, you'd be all over it, and you'd be doing this and that and so forth. And this witness was there at the time. He knows that he was satisfied with what was being done.
He doesn't know anything that's being done is the problem. Same
Well,
objection. Your Honor.
wait a minute, he said he knew what was being done. I knew that the New York City and Westchester were thoroughly investigating it.
Do you think
Okay,
said
you're
that.
no, be quiet, Mr. Chesnoff. Hold on, I'm having a dialogue here with your colleague, Mr. DeGuerin. So, when you all interrupt my train of thought, it's hard for me to concentrate when you're all talking at me. So, just a second. The jury is okay. So the jury has heard what investigation has taken place, and so you want to ask this witness his satisfaction with the investigation that had taken place. Is that your theory of relevance, Mr. DeGuerin?
Well,
You
it's
want
more-
this witness to give his opinion about how he felt about the nature of the investigation. From that, the jurors should feel better about the investigation and feel more confidence in Mr. Durst's attitude at that time, because his brother had an opinion, when the jury themselves have heard what was done. Is that your argument?
No.
What's your
My
argument?
argument is that this witness was there. He was observing what was going on. He's been questioned about whether Bob was acting appropriately and how he was reacting to.
He was asked a question about his tone. Was he concerned? Was he distraught? So that's true. That has been presented to this witness.
And the witness, in response to Mr. Lewin's questions in the interview, said that he felt that the investigation was appropriate. He had said they were thoroughly investigating it. That's important. He was there.
Oh, all right, maybe. So, Mr. Lewin, if, let's say that his brother's paying attention to, has reason to pay attention to the investigation that's happening, primarily by New York City, and he has heard he's commented about, well, let's see.
The problem is there's no evidence that he had any knowledge of what New York State Police were doing. But Your Honor, at this point in time, honestly, it's not even, the court's made its ruling. The court can at this point in time, it's really not even worth the protracted discussion about it. I will say this, just want to make sure that counsel does not intend to try to get into anything relating to the inadmissible issues regarding elevator operators, et cetera. I want to make sure that's not coming next.
And of course, now Mr. Chesnoff has raised a question that all witnesses are tainted or consistently tainted by conversations with the prosecution.
Well, here's the problem.
That's what he's suggesting, is that the people should be allowed to prove that Mr. Douglas Durst had one point of view, and then had a conversation with you and with law enforcement, and then he testified to something different, and that I am precluding the jury from hearing about the taint that the prosecution is having upon its witnesses. That's their theory. Now, I'm not quite sure how this question
Do you want me
and
to-
answer addresses this concern, but yes, Mr.
Let me address
Yeah.
that. So,
Yeah.
in actuality, what they've done is the witness has admitted that, yes, I said that. The problem is not about what the witness is saying now versus then. The witness is saying that if I said that in 2015, I said that. The problem is with the witness' original statement regarding what the New York State investigators are doing. He doesn't have the knowledge to have said it. So the problem is just because a witness says during an interview and they talk about something that they have no personal knowledge of, does not mean that they get to come into court and repeat that information.
Okay,
That's
so
why I have the
stop right
objection.
there, because I can't take too many more words. This is
Okay.
this is the principle that discovery does not equal admissibility. So he's asked this statement, not in a court of law, but in a room, all right? He's made the statement, he's ventured an opinion. That doesn't make it admissible. What makes it admissible is, first of all, a foundation that he actually knows something about this, right? And many of these statements will. But here, he's made a prior statement. Shouldn't the defense, before cross-examining on this point, have to make the foundational point, are you aware of what was done by the Westchester County, or
Okay.
the state police?
So let's say we do that.
Okay.
And he says, I don't remember. And then
Yes.
you say to him, well, when you were previously interviewed by Mr. Lewin, you made the statement that it was thorough. What did you base that on? What, I mean, you're responsible for your words, Your Honor.
I don't know objection. If they want to ask him, very simply, if you want to ask him, why did you say that the investigation was thorough? What did you know? I have no problem with that. You might want to ask him in
We're
advance.
not-
That's a legitimate question. As an offer of proof, it's my understanding that he is going to say, I don't know anything about the investigation. That's the impression that I had based on no firsthand knowledge, et cetera, which is why we go back to the question, lacks foundation and is
So,
it relevant?
all right, so I had sustained the foundation that it lacks foundation. I still don't know that this is going to lead to anything relevant, or that it is. I guess the point that satisfies relevance is this idea that he's commenting upon Mr. Durst's demeanor and his lack of concern or lack of concern, which tends to suggest that he's guilty or knows that she's deceased if he's not really concerned about finding her. So you want to contradict that. You want to contradict that by talking to his brother, who was present at the time and observed these things. So if I say this is relevant and allow you to question on this point, I can only let you do that if you first lay a foundation that he actually does know something, or that at some previous time he indicated that he knew something enough to make a statement about it. Right? So that's what I will do. I'll sustain the objection and let you ask a different question in order to lay a foundation and pursue it if that's satisfied. All right?
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're welcome. All right. Are people here, or did they give up? Okay. Okay, so jurors get